Logic is a crowning achievement of human knowledge. It organizes our reasoning with unfamiliar or abstract subject matter, such as the laws of government and science, and when implemented in silicon, it turns inert matter into thinking machines. There you go. My friend Freddie's always wondering, hey, how come, what about the fluid of life? That's what turns inorganic matter into like organic thinking, feeling matter. No, it's interpretive mechanisms. It's a whole having a whole bunch of having a whole bunch of if-then rules. Okay. But what the untutored human mind commands is not a general purpose, content-free tool with formulas like if P then Q is equivalent to not P and not Q, into which any P and Q can be plugged. We do not have that hardwired into us, that equivalence, even though it's a pretty fundamental equivalence. It commands a set of more specialized tools that bake together the content relevant to the problem with the rules of logic. Without those rules, the tools wouldn't work. I don't think it commands what's it. The untutored human mind, okay, commands a set of more specialized tools that bake together the content relevant to the problem with the rules of logic. When they say the rule, when he says the rules, he doesn't mean like all the rules of logic, surely. Just some if-thens. Anyway, it isn't easy for people to extricate the rules and wield them in novel, abstract, or apparently meaningless problems. That's what education and rationality enhancing institutions are for. Yes. Then you can develop critical reflection. They augment the ecological rationality we are born and grew up with, our horse sense, our street smarts, with the broader spectrum and more potent tools of reasoning perfected by our best thinkers over the millennia. And that's why authority matters and education matters. And, when people, your average Joe hasn't had a certain education or hasn't learn some critical reflection principles. Doesn't even have critical recognition, doesn't even know he's like a brain or that he needs to learn critical reflection principles. Well, then he goes and looks at the same information as the expert, says, hey, look, I've got this other interpretation and it's equally valid. Hold on, pal. Our brains are pretty shit at this stuff. Have you worked really hard on making your brain a little less shit at that particular question? Section A simple probability problem. One of the most famous television game shows from the heyday of the genre, from the 1950s to the 1980s, was Let's Make a Deal. Its host, Monty Hall, achieved a second kind of fame when a dilemma in probability theory, loosely based on the show, was named after him. A contestant is faced with three doors. Behind one of them is a sleek new car. Behind the other two are goats. The contestant picks a door, say door one. To build suspense, Monty opens one of the other two doors, say door 3, we're on page 17 now, revealing a goat. To build the suspense still further, he gives the contestant an opportunity either to stick with their original choice or to switch to the unopened door. You are the contestant. What should you do? You have to go watch a video on the Monty Hall problem. You have to be able to. It took me years to kind of be able to wrap my mind around it from a lot of people's different explanations. By the way, I probably shouldn't be reading everything. I should just read the Monty Hall problem is good though. So let's continue. Almost everyone stays. They figure that since the car was placed behind one of the three doors at random, and door 3 has been eliminated, there is now a 50-50 chance each that the car will be behind door 1 or door 2. Though there's no harm in switching, they think, there's no benefit either. So they stick with their first choice out of inertia, pride, or anticipation that their regret after an unlucky switch would be more intense than their delight after a lucky one. And those are interesting mechanisms. So the last one is called if we'll formulate it as if the thing that I change from if I give up a good thing, Or if I have the opportunity to give up a good thing, then don't. If I can anticipate regret from my choice, then don't do it. Make that choice. There's also the inaction bias. If, regardless of the negative effects of inaction, if action can lead to negative effects, don't take the action. So that's a number of different its that are involved that get people to stay. The Monty Hall dilemma became famous in 1990 when it was presented in the Ask Marilyn Jesus. The Monty Hall dilemma became famous in 1990 when it was presented in the Ask Marilyn column in Parade, a magazine inserted in the Sunday edition of hundreds of American newspapers. The columnist was Marilyn von Savant, known at the time as the world's smartest woman, because of her entry in the Guinness Book of World Records for the highest score on an intelligence test. Von Savant wrote that you should switch. The odds of the car being behind door 2 are 2 in 3, compared with 1 in 3 for door 1. The column drew 10,000 letters, 1,000 of them from PhDs, mainly in mathematics and statistics, most of whom said she was wrong. Here are some examples. You blew it, and you blew it big. Since you seem to have difficulty grasping the basic principles at work here, I'll explain. After the host reveals a goat, you now have a 1 in 2 chance of being correct. Whether you change your selection or not, the odds are the same. There is enough mathematical illiteracy in this country, and we don't need the world's highest IQ propagating more. Shame. Scott Smith, a PhD at the University of Florida. Page 18. I am sure you will receive many letters on this topic from high school and college students. Perhaps you should keep a few addresses for help with future columns. W. Robert Smith, PhD, Georgia State University. Maybe women look at math problems differently than men. Don Edwards, Sun River, Oregon. Among the objectors was Paul Erdős, 1913-1996, the renowned mathematician who was so prolific that many academics boast of their Erdős number. Oh, is that the length of the shortest chain of co-authorships linking them to the great theoretician. But the mansplaining mathematicians were wrong, and the world's smartest woman was right. You should switch. It's not that hard to see why. Okay, don't be mean, Pinker. There are 3 possibilities for where the car could have been placed. Let's consider each door and count up the number of times out of the 3 that you would win with each strategy. You picked door 1, but of course that's just a label. As long as Monty follows the rule open an unselected door with a goat, if both have goats, pick one at random. The odds come out the same whichever door you picked. Suppose your strategy is stay. That's the left column in the figure. Well, it's the only figure you're looking at right now. If the car is behind door 1, top left, you win. It doesn't matter which of the other doors Monty opened because you're not switching to either. If the car is behind door 2, middle left, you lose. If the car is behind door 3, bottom left, you lose. So the odds of winning with the stay strategy are now 1 in 3. Now suppose your strategy is switch. The current figure. If the car is behind door 1, you lose. If the car is behind door 2, Monty would have opened door 3, so you would switch to door 2 and win. If the car is behind door 3, he would have opened door 2, so you would switch to door 3 and win. Page 19. The odds of winning with the switch strategy are 2 in 3, double the odds of staying. It's not rocket surgery. Even if you don't work through the logical possibilities, you could play a few rounds yourself with cutouts and toys and tot up the outcomes as Hall himself did to convince a skeptical journalist. Nowadays, you can play it online. Or you could pursue the intuition, Monty knows the answer and gave me a clue. It would be foolish not to act on it. Why do the mathematicians, professors, and other big shots get it so wrong? Certainly, there were failures of critical thinking coming from sexism, ad hominem biases, and professional jealousy. Don't love that sentence, but yes, no, it's true that if it's a woman talking, then vote down on Credence. That's one it that's running, and so that it is gonna inhibit a little bit the belief that we would have, the trust that we would have in the what the person's saying. Um, also, there is a mechanism that like if someone sort of occupies your niche, keep an eye out for opportunities to keep that as your niche. So we are more vigilant for the mistakes of people that may be threats. So all it does is the if is if there's someone who might be a threat, then you know engage mechanisms with like sort of everything they do, and anytime there's an error, oh, get on that, or a possible error, get on that. Okay. Vasavant is, page 20, an attractive and stylish woman with no initials after her name, who wrote for a recipe and gossip filled rag and bantered on late night talk shows. She defied the stereotype of a mathematician, and her celebrity and bragging rights from Guinness made her a big, fat target for a takedown. But part of the problem is the problem itself. Like the teasers in the cognitive reflection and Watson selection tests, something about the Monty Hall dilemma is designed to bring out the stupid in our System 1. But in this case, System 2 is not much brighter. Many people can't swallow the correct explanation even when it's pointed out to them. When they explain it to me, when I learned about the Monty Hall problem, I was like, what? What? That's not. Why are all these people so wrong? And by all these people, I meant people who believed that it was better to switch. This included Erdős, who, violating the soul of a mathematician, was convinced only when he saw the game repeatedly simulated. Many persist even when they see it simulated and even when they repeatedly play for money. What's the mismatch between our intuitions and the laws of chance? A clue comes from the overconfident justifications that the know-it-alls offered for their blunders, sometimes thoughtlessly carried over from other probability puzzles. Many people insist that each of the unknown alternatives, in this case the unopened doors, must have an equal probability. That is true of symmetrical gambling toys like the faces of a coin or sides of a die, and it is a reasonable starting point when you know absolutely nothing about the alternatives. But it is not a law of nature. Many visualize the causal chain. The car and goats were placed prior to the reveal, and opening a door can't move them around after the fact. Pointing out the independence of causal mechanisms is a common way to debunk other illusions, such as the gambler's fallacy, in which people misguidedly think that after a run of reds, the next spin of the roulette wheel will turn up black. When in fact, the wheel has no memory, so every spin is independent. As one of Vasavant's correspondents mansplained, picture a race with 3 horses, each, page 21, having an equal chance of winning. If horse number 3 drops dead 50 feet into the race, the chances for each of the remaining 2 horses are no longer 1 in 3, but rather are now 1 in 2. Clearly, he concluded, it would not make much sense to switch one's bet from horse number 1 to horse number 2. But this is not how the problem works. Imagine that after you place your bet on number 1, God announces it's not going to be horse number 3. No comment on horse number 1. He could have warned against horse number 2, but didn't. Switching your bet doesn't sound so crazy. In Let's Make a Deal, Monty Hall is God. Alright, so if I want to publish this Golf 26 Bravo video from 2022, we have to read probably about 5 more pages almost. No, probably about 4. Okay, so the godlike host reminds us how exotic the Monty Hall problem is.
It requires an omniscient being who defies the usual goal of a conversation to share what the hearer needs to know, in this case, which door hides the car, and instead pursues the goal of enhancing suspense among third parties. And unlike the world, whose clues are indifferent to our sleuthing, Monty Almighty knows the truth and knows our choice and picks his revelation accordingly. People's insensitivity to this lucrative but esoteric information pinpoints the cognitive weakness at the heart of the puzzle. We confuse probability with propensity. All right, whatever he's going to say is going to be great, but just want to say that's so great. That's so important already. People's insensitivity. And when we say words like insensitivity or failure or whatever, what we're talking about is an absence or a weakness of appropriate mechanisms, appropriate its. We have the its that were appropriate to our evolution, but not to all philosophy and logic, because those things weren't super necessary to the extent that we play with them today. All right. A propensity is the disposition of an object to act in certain ways. So this is like a hot hand or gambler's fallacy. Intuitions about propensities are a major part of our mental models of the world. People sense that bent branches tend to spring back, that kudu. If you're like me, you may have been imagining a branch that's going to break. But what we're talking about is like the thinner branches. Someone's in front of you moving through the woods, and you see that they're like, there's a branch bending from them. I think that's what we're talking about here. People sense that bent branches tend to spring back, that kudu may tire easily. What's that? That porcupines usually leave. Oh, yeah, that was one of the animals hunted by the sand people that we talked about it on the previous page. People sense that bent branches tend to spring back, that kudu may tire easily, that porcupines usually leave tracks with two pad prints. A propensity cannot be perceived directly. Either the branch sprang back or it didn't. But it can be inferred by scrutinizing the physical makeup of an object and working through the laws of cause and effect. Can you hold on for a second? Because I do not understand what that just said. It might be the whiskey. Okay, a propensity cannot be perceived directly. Sure, it's like kinetic energy. It's like what a propensity was defined as the disposition of an object to act in certain ways, like what it's prepared to do, what it's likely to do. So that cannot be perceived directly. Right, because if either the branch sprang back or didn't, that doesn't really tell us about the propensity of the object in that particular instance. I mean, that particular instance doesn't tell us about the propensity of the object. I don't know. But it can be inferred by scrutinizing the physical makeup of an object. Nice wet, living branch. It's not dead, it's not dry. It's not going to just snap. Okay. And working through the laws of cause and effect. Maybe I saw the person push it, so it's going to come back to the way that it was because, like, some intuitive sense I have of forces. Oh, look. A drier branch may snap. A kudu has more stamina in the rainy season. A porcupine has two proximal pads, which leave pad prints when the ground is soft, but not necessarily when it is hard. So these are like exceptions. I think we're all on the same page here. Bottom of 21. But probability is different. It is a conceptual tool invented in the 17th century. And of course, we are going to call that the 117th century. Not we, but, smart people who are talking about the human era. So this is the 117th century of the human era. Anyway, all right, sorry. All right, the word has several meanings. But the one that matters in making risky decisions is the strength of one's belief in an unknown state of affairs. What? Probability is different. It is a conceptual tool invented in the 117th century. The word has several meanings, but the one that matters in making risky decisions is the strength of one's belief in an unknown state of affairs. Any scrap of evidence that alters our confidence in an outcome will change its probability and the rational way to act upon it. The dependence of probability on ethereal knowledge rather than just physical makeup helps explain why people fail at the dilemma. I think I've given up on trying to follow this paragraph. I'm just going to read it for you. And what time are we at? So I do. I'm not even halfway through. All right. Any scrap of evidence that alters our confidence in an outcome will change its probability and the rational way to act upon it. Here's what's tripping me up. I'm not so eager to make the jump from something that alters our confidence to something that actually changes the probability of the thing and actually changes the rational way to act upon it. The word has several meanings, but the one that matters in making risky decisions is the strength of one's belief in an unknown state of affairs. All right, hopefully I'm going to understand this. All right. The dependence of probability on ethereal knowledge rather than just physical makeup helps explain why people fail at the dilemma. They intuit the propensities for the car to have ended up behind the different doors, and they know that opening a door could not have changed those propensities. But probabilities are not about the world. They're about our ignorance of the world. Right. Obviously. Right. Okay. Right. Alright, well, there's no way I'm going to be able to move on without saying to you, uh, I do have mechanisms that understand this, even though I've demonstrated mechanisms that don't. I also have ones that do. You look at my journal and I talk about how people talk about probability. Probability is a subjective thing. Unless we're talking about like quantum stuff. But yeah, okay, all right, we're on the same page here. Page 22. They intuit the propensities for blah, blah, blah. But probabilities are not about the world. They're about our ignorance of the world. So the world's going to do what it's going to do. Our probability estimates are like based on the information that we have, which is what makes us objective. Here's what the chances are. And then also based on whatever our interpretive mechanisms do, our its do, to run that quote-unquote calculation, which is probably like on a scale of 1 to 4. Anyway, new information reduces our ignorance and changes the probability. If that sounds mystical or paradoxical, it does. I'm barely hanging on here. Think about the probability that a coin I just flipped landed heads. For you, it's 0.5. For me, it's 1. I peaked. Same event, different knowledge, different probability. In the Monty Hall dilemma, new information is provided by the all-seeing host. One implication is that when the reduction of ignorance granted by the host is more transparently connected to the physical circumstances, the solution to the problem becomes intuitive. Thus, Savant invited our readers to imagine a variation of the game show with, say, 1,000 doors. You pick one. Monty reveals a goat behind 998 of the others. Would you switch to the door he left closed? This time it seems clear that Monty's choice conveys actionable information. And by seems clear, it's not the information that seems clear, but this information slaps the mechanism such that it seems clear to a human brain. So when Stephen Pinker is saying this time it seems clear, he's not saying objectively it seems clear to any reader. He's saying typically to a human brain, at this point it would seem clear. One can visualize him, not, if it doesn't seem clear, don't, anyway. One can visualize him scanning the doors for the car as he decides which one not to open, and the closed door is a sign of his having spotted the car, and hence a spore of the car itself. Yeah. And when you add in that visualization, now the human brain's like, definitely. When you add in that narrative, even though that narrative is not demonstrated, but just that narrative is that possibility that he was looking at the doors and chose not to open the one with the car behind it. When you visualize that, So this does, when you revocalate it this way, and that term is for when you rephrase something such that it's a little bit easier for our mechanisms, or it avoids slapping maladaptive mechanisms, or encourages whatever good mechanisms. Anyway, good its. So so that's great. So this is a human revocalation. Savant, she's a human. She's a savant, but she's still a human. And so she came up with this thing that seemed to her more intuitively obvious, just by adding hundreds of doors, and then suggest that to her readers. And I think that, like, I'm cool. Yeah, that like works for me. I guess that does sit better than when I picture it with 3 doors.